Ow. Thank you, everyone, and thank you to Seth for that very nice series of words that made me super uncomfortable. I don't do well with compliments, but thank you. So today, as Seth mentioned, I kind of want to take you through some of my approaches for how I handle kind of classic portraiture, which doesn't always necessarily need a particularly large space. So I want to kind of take you through what that looks like, how I build that out. Sometimes what I'm working with is very, very minimal gear. Sometimes it's one light, maybe two, or one light and a reflector. Other times I'm able to kind of really cram a lot into a small space. And I want to kind of show you what that brings me in terms of kind of visuals of the image and why I would go through all of the effort if sometimes it becomes quite a bit more complicated and more tight to kind of work in. So why would I even want to go through that effort? I want to show you what that kind of brings to the table. I'm going to be working with a variety of tools today. My camera that I'm going to be using, I'm on the Fuji GFX system, so it's a larger format system. I'll explain what lenses I'm using as I go, but I'm going to give you a full frame equivalent as we go through that, just so you kind of can keep up to that. The lights that I'm mostly going to be using today are the Profoto heads. I believe we have the B30s today as our primary lights. So they function pretty similar to, you know, most of the ones in the Profoto ecosystem, if you're familiar with it, in the same way as we're going to be using a lot of their modifiers as well. For the background, we've got this is a Westcott pop-up. Manfrotto, thank you. It's just a simple textured backdrop. I oftentimes like to bring in textured backdrops, whether they be something printed like this or a canvas or a muslin, just to kind of break up and give a little bit of texture to the images that I make. But again, it totally depends on what your needs are. I would use this for more of a traditional, kind of that classic portrait setting, or if you want like a headshot, you might be dealing with something a little bit cleaner. I typically gravitate towards something that's got a little bit of feel to it. I love the idea of texture. And so whether it be the background, the clothing they wear, the way that hair gets messy, or the scruff on the face, all those little things I think start to inject a little bit of that that feeling into the image that I'm usually always after, and kind of gets me away from things that feel a little too perfect or pristine, which isn't usually my flavor. I'm going to be tethering into Capture One today. If you're unfamiliar with that as a tether program, that is what we're looking at, as opposed to a Lightroom. And yeah, that's pretty much it. All right. So with that being said, we're going to kind of build these lights in one at a time. I'm going to kind of take you through what I'm thinking about as we do this. Now, the idea of like classic portraiture or timeless portraiture, what I'm talking about when I refer to that are kind of the greats who have established a lot of these really classically, almost like Mount Rushmorean ideas of what the portrait is. We're talking like the Avedons and the Pens. If you think of a white portrait, it's because of Avedon. Not that he necessarily created it, but he was the one who kind of made it that iconic thing. Or the Pen window portrait, or the Pen corner portrait, or the carpet portraits. Pen had several different things that he kind of really defined. Or we look at like the work of Karsh doing that very classic formal style of portraiture. And so for me, a lot of these things are cemented into the DNA of how most people approach portraiture, whether or not they're always consciously thinking about it or not. And so these ideas, like the shooting on a textured background with a big soft light, it's not a new idea. It's been done. And so we kind of want to think about how we can pay respect to those ideas and create it using these newer tools, because we're not using the same things they were using before. One of my favorite types of portraiture is like the classic pen portrait, the window portrait, where you'd have like this really beautiful contrast, that checkerboarding of light, where it'd go like light, dark, and you go kind of explore a lot of his portraits. The Picasso portrait, where it's kind of tucked over and stuff, they all kind of have a very similar structure in that way. And it took me a really long time to kind of really wrap my head around what he was doing. And eventually I learned it was just a window. It was a window. If you wanted the background to look a certain way, he'd angle the background, he'd angle them with the light. It was really kind of simple. He would really modify the window in some pretty unique ways, but it was just this idea of a complex big soft light. And so it's all about kind of paying attention to the finesse. It's paying attention to the really simple ideas we're familiar with and kind of doing something a little more nuanced with it. Now, we're also not using a window. We're not using that dusty, dirty window. So we have to kind of create something that feels like it with more modern tools. So that's what we're going to be doing today. For my main light, we're going to start with something simple here. I've got this B30 head. And how I usually like to configure it is I like to put my A's, or my key light on A. I usually do my fill on B. I usually do a background on C. It's just a normal formula that I always typically gravitate toward. I know some people like to have their different little quirks of that, but that's usually my move. And then I kind of go from there with additional lights. So this is going to be my main light. We're going to call this A. I've already got it set up for A. And I'm going to be using a modeling light here just so that I can help point it a little bit and make my life a little bit easier. We're going to start it over here. Okay. For my main light, I'm looking for just a big soft light source. I am a big fan of the Profoto pop-up softboxes. This is a 4-foot octa. I like these just because they're pretty quick to get up and going. Get up and going. Yeah. Those words there. One of the things that I'll also change this out with all the time is like a big umbrella with diffusion. The thing about this is this is going to give me a little bit of a punchier light, something with a little bit more of an edge, a little more shape to it. And I can kind of angle it a little more off the background. Sometimes if I don't want this necessarily to light everything super evenly, this can help me kind of contour the light in a small space a little more effectively. This one's new, it's stuck. There we go. Okay. And there is, making sure there was no grid on that. Cool. So we're going to put the modeling light on so we can see here. Maybe it's bright enough. That's pretty good. Yeah. That's fine. Now, what am I going to set my settings to? Well, my camera has a sync speed of 1/125th, so I'm going to be using that as a shutter speed. I'm going to stick with a relatively low ISO to start, maybe somewhere around 100 or so. For my aperture, this is where I decide what I want this to feel like. Do I want the background totally in focus? Do I want some soft edges? A lot of times in studio, these things don't really matter that much unless I'm really skewing one way or the other. So, you know, you might find that you want to shoot somewhere around a mid-level aperture for something like this, and then it just becomes a matter of getting it approximately there. Other times where maybe I want to introduce a lower aperture because I want it to feel a certain way with those softer edges, I might intentionally aim to go a little softer. So I think that's probably what I'm going to do. I'm going to aim for something relatively soft. Maybe we'll stick around a 4 or so. Oftentimes when I'm dealing with exposure, because I'm thinking about relative power between the different lights in my head, I would say that I more often than not tend to set my lights, especially my main lights, around full stops, just because it makes it easier for me to do the math in my head. So like if I'm putting this at like an F4, for example, and I know that I want my fill light to be 2 stops below, that's an easy thing I can get to in my head, right? So I can go, okay, well, this is where I want the fill at 2. So just, it helps me kind of work the math out. Same with like, you know, anything higher or lower. That just, I find to be really, really helpful. So I'm going to set this, I guess. What's that? So you don't want me to block? You want me to? Well, you know, you said it wasn't going to be a problem. I'm going to move this to the other side because Seth said, don't block the audience.
Would you guys like to not see anything? Is that the goal you would like? Chris, by all means, do the demo where we block everything.
But I like a left side. I've got a light meter here. I am using the 858. I regularly like to use meters just sometimes for speediness. And also it helps in the demonstration. So I'm using ISO 100, 1/125th. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to trigger this using my my remote.
So you just see the model.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be fine. I want to make this read about 4. It's kind of what I'm going for. Maybe a little over 4, maybe like a 4, 4.5. If I want to slightly overexpose, but we're going to start. That was actually, oh, that was a really good guess.
Oh man, that's within 1/10.
I got it was a 1 to the. It was purely luck. I'm going to change this to a 4 just so that we're even, and I'm going to kind of show you where that starts. Lens that I'm using here is an 80 millimeter, so full frame equivalent is 70, 68, 72-ish. Sure. I'm going to be at f4, so 1/125th ISO 100 f4, just to kind of show you what this looks like. There's nothing. This is just a straight, flat out light. Okay. Perfect. No, it's like it's exposed, fine, right? It's kind of painting with a big brush, meaning it's lighting him, it's lighting the background, relatively thin, but you're like, it does feel a little darker than you might like it, even though it's there. You're going to get certain variances between lenses with how that aperture maps out. I would probably say more often than not on lighter skin tones, especially when I'm doing kind of a more classic portraiture, I'm more likely to kind of overexpose anywhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of a stop, especially if I'm going to crank the contrast up. Okay, so I put this at 4, like just to kind of prove a point. I'm going to turn it up 1/2 a stop, so 0.5. This is not going to look as bright as it seems at being about 1/2 a stop overexposed. Actually, it looks pretty good. And the nice thing about this is when I kind of crank this up in terms of contrast, the skin kind of gets pushed into that brighter tone that I think works in that more kind of classic portraiture, which you get here. You can actually see, even if I push it another 1/2 a stop or so, it still works, right? So you can, I suppose you can shoot it there as well. I can also turn it up another 1/2 a stop, just to get it about where it was. And so even though I metered it at 4 originally, I'm still shooting it at 4. This is overexposed by almost a stop. And you actually see that it looks pretty good. So sometimes the meter is a starting point, but again, depending upon how you're shooting it, the way you're processing it, sometimes you have to kind of be prepared to make those adjustments to exposure to make it render how you want it to be.
Question in the chat. They're saying that they've seen a lot of your work have a lot of negative space on the top of the portrait. They're wondering, when is it best to break the rules effectively for that?
I probably think I break the rule of cutting the top of the head off way more than I do leaving negative space. I got a few images that have negative space, but I love to cut the top of the head off. The reason why I typically do that is because it's a type of shot you see in film. It's the ECU, the extreme close-up, where they pop in and they're going really, really close to the face. So I pop into that every once in a while, and it just puts all the attention on the face and the expression, as opposed to kind of the top of the head, where sometimes there's not a whole lot of interesting stuff happening up there. I think with composition in general, it's always great to learn. It's great to kind of learn the mechanics and the theories and all that kind of stuff that goes into it. But at the end of the day, I think composition really is an extension of balance. And so sometimes balance is the point, other times imbalance is the point. And it really kind of falls on what you want the image to feel like. And if you want the negative space because the weirdness or the sense of rest is what works for you in the image, then I think you can make that thing. But there's no rule. It really is kind of more intuition than anything else. Okay. This is pretty direct, yeah? So it's a relatively dark background, and he's got dark hair and a dark shirt, so you're not getting a ton of separation between the two. We're gonna come back to that later. For now, I only wanna look at kind of what the main light is doing here. In this small space, the bigger your model, in any space, the larger the light source is relative to the subject, the softer it will be. this is pretty soft, okay? But I can also, because of this edge, taper it off of him a little bit. This is going to lower the exposure a little bit, which I'd probably have to compensate for. But it's going to start to bring a little bit of light off the background. Even though he's only, I don't know, maybe 2 feet off the background, this will actually give you even more control. Depends on what's happening over here. In this case, there's not a wall or anything to bounce off of. But you'll actually see that this will change it even more. So you can kind of see the background just in that small space. I lost a little bit of light, yeah? So even if I were to bring that back up a little bit more, you're still going to get a tiny bit of fall off. So you're going to get a better fall off of light there between this and this, right? So that's one simple way to control. A grid would be another way that you can kind of control that too. But I think this is giving me a really nice quality of light on his face. Yeah? There is basically a 3-light setup I use all the time. That is like my de facto standard, which is kind of what I'm showing you here. I've got some kind of a main light, oftentimes umbrella, it's an octabox, something like this. Then I've got something for a fill light. This is what's going to be controlling my shadows in the image. Sometimes it's a big umbrella back here. Other times I'll just take a light and I'll bounce it off the room just to kind of lighten the shadows of everything. And then a lot of times what I'll do, I'm not usually one for a rim light. I'll usually throw a little splash of light on the background for separation. This is just kind of helping to create a little bit of form. Now, if you're familiar with the pen portrait, I talked about the checkerboard lighting. So it's going light, dark, light, dark. So basically what that means is, let's say the light's coming from this side over here on camera right. This is going to be dark. Then this is going to be light. Then his face goes dark. And then this needs to be light over here. Okay? You can sometimes do this if you really want to sit there and refine it a lot with your main light. This can kind of rake across, and you can basically like find the edge of it. It's a little hard in here with all the lights being on, but you can kind of create that effect. It almost looks like the light's going in 2 different directions. You can do it with one light. It's a pain, but you can. I oftentimes find what I will regularly do is I'll just throw an extra light back on there to create that effect, and it just helps me to control it a little bit more. For that, I'm going to use one of these. I've got one more light on a small stand, okay? And in an ideal world, I'd probably have an extra, even an extra foot probably makes a little bit of a difference. So I'm going to move this just a hair back, just a tiny, tiny bit back. This makes all the difference in the world. And on this light, you can see that it's going kind of everywhere, right? So my go-to for this, more often than not, is I use a grid on a zoom reflector. They make these for a great number of different types of modifiers. The grid's just going to be restricting the light. This is a 10-degree grid, so it's a pretty tight beam of light. They make all different degrees for these, 10, 20, 30, so you can get kind of different size spreads. It's just basically, this is in here, a little honeycomb thing. You can kind of see, it's almost like tiny little tunnels. This won't change the quality of light. So this is a hard light source. It's going to be a hard light source. It's just going to take it from this big thing to that. The bigger the degree, the bigger the beam. So this is 10. This is pretty small. It's usually 5, 10, 20. But if you need this to be a little bit bigger, just back it out a little bit, okay? And you can kind of see I'm not getting any light here. So it's just control, okay? I'll give you a technical and a practical thing when it comes to how bright should this be. Different surfaces reflect light differently. Different brightnesses reflect light differently. Technically, if you'd like to measure this, you need a reflected light meter, which is a different mode on one of these, and you measure the light bouncing off the surface. You can also measure the light at the exposure by just metering it there at the wall, but it's always going to be different. because materials are different, colors, reflections, so forth and so on. So you have to use a reflected light meter. That's a whole other thing. More often than not, I eye this. I just find that it's a little bit faster in practical application. So I'm gonna stick this right here, and I'm just gonna raise and lower it until I'm happy. It's on C. I also like the modeling light here because I can move around and I know exactly what it's gonna look like. So for example, if I go here, I know kind of where it's gonna be positioned, right? And if I wanna make it brighter, I'm gonna turn it up, let's say 2 stops. I can make it brighter, right? If I want to make it somewhere in between, I'm going to turn it down a stop, maybe I'll back it out a little bit just to spread that out a little more. You'll notice that I was kind of shooting from a little bit of a higher angle just because I had it angled a little low. So let's just raise it up a little bit based on how I want to shoot it. But it's not spilling onto the face, right? Which is great. So now I can go a little lower with my background. Cool. Really beautiful separation. And if you were to see this in a pure black and white, all I've got is a little punch of contrast here. I think you can go back a little bit brighter where it was. I still think once we see it in black and white. Yeah, it's actually purple in person. It's just showing up blue. Yeah, probably a little bit. But you can kind of see how we're getting into that dark light, right? That's the checkerboard. This is kind of your pen-ish version of that window. Ish, right? What's that? Sure.
Melanie's saying she notices that the camera's a little above the model. When do you shoot from above, and when do you shoot at eye level or below?
Not really a right or wrong for that. I think a lot of times with portrait work, I tend to favor a more creative approach in terms of angle and lens versus something being straightforward. Like with a headshot, for example, which is fundamentally this, right? He is the center of this, trying to make it look good and flattering. And a lot of times the choices we make in a lens or light is to kind of be invisible, right? The lens choice being long or close to how we see distortion, or the perspective, maybe just finding that right angle of flattering balance. And that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of times if you, like, especially if you look at the pen work, sometimes he'd shoot it a little wide, he'd get a little low for a hero shot, or a little high to put more contact to the eyes. And so it really depends on what you want to project in your subject. Do you want to shoot them low to make them feel powerful? Do you want to shoot them a little high where I feel like it connects more on the eyes? It's really all about preference and projection. So for example, you can look up those. That was nice. So if I wanted to kind of shoot him this way and go for a more traditional hero angle, this is eyes. This makes me feel very differently. And it's not that one is right or wrong, it's just about the opinion, right? Another thing that I regularly like to do is I like to shoot with something that's just a little bit wider than you probably are used to doing. This is a 55mm lens, so about a 40-42 on a full frame. And as an environmental portrait, that feels usually pretty mid or you know, relatively balanced. But when you get really close with it, it's fine. You can look up that way. That was nice. You can create something a little more dynamic, which I like. It's got a little bit of a distortion to it, but I'm kind of into it, right? So fundamentally, these two aren't that different, like in terms of his pose and it being a low angle, but I think something with that wider lens, when you get close to it, really makes you feel involved and close and almost uncomfortably close. And I think that's kind of one of my favorite things about portraiture is that it lets you, it almost acts as a shield to be able to get closer than we're often getting with people in normal interactions. I think that becomes kind of interesting. It's a real like entering of a personal space, and I think it lets us psychologically feel closer and more intimate with the subject. I think that's a very, very cool thing. So there's a lot I could kind of play around with here. So for example, can we do the cool teacher shot here really quick?
Of course.
Great. So I do like, often I regularly use a posing table so that I can bring hands in, right? When that is not, when you don't have one around, back of a chair works really well. And so try this for me. Yeah, let's throw that on. And let's roll the sleeves up too. Yeah. Yeah. Everybody loves a rolled sleeve.
Now it's an after-school program. Look at this.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Smoking's bad.
Hello, fellow kids. Drinking and driving's bad.
Great. Cool. Awesome. Let's turn you a little bit more. Yep, great. Cool. And then since he lowered, I'm going to lower this down a little bit. Cool. And then what you can kind of do here is just kind of lean across and maybe almost don't like hand here, but it's almost like you can bring it a little lower and you're going to bring it next to the face, but not press into it. So it's almost like a here. Bring the head up just a little bit. Turn your face out that way a little bit more. Good. Furrow the brow a little bit for me. Open the mouth just a little bit. And then just your eye, look at me. Okay? And so like, I think this starts to do something really fun. Right? Now, I think because I'm using the wider lens, it makes my spot look a little smaller. So I'm going to back this up a little bit. And I do think my shadow is a little dark for my taste. Okay? So let's make this a little taller. Put it a little, because since I'm shooting it a little low, I'm just going to make it about right there. Let's try that again. And then
Mimic what we just did.
oh, that's great. Don't worry. So even though like I'm not including a table, like you kind of get a sense that there's one there. I think it works, right? But I think the shadows are a little dark. Now I could do this in post, like you can, but we have a light, so let's do it here. I'm gonna just take this light. I'm gonna bounce it off the room, okay? Just to lighten everything up a little bit. This is on B, so I keep this separate. I'm just going to take a test fire on it just to see. It's pretty dark still. Wow. Yeah, I know. I was hoping it would. I was at 7. I thought it would do something. Turn that up about 2.5 stops. Still nothing, huh? I know, but there's not enough space, man. What do you want from me?
You want to get it to here?
It'll reach, yeah.
Yeah. Put a zoom reflector.
Yeah, I mean, it's lightening up a little bit, but honestly, I for it being at the end of the power, it's just, we're bouncing it off black, which is pretty much the worst case scenario. It is, I was learning a little bit, but not really enough. Hopefully directionally that works. Let's just see. Yeah, a little bit. it's just down a little. So I'm just basically trying to lighten up a little bit of the overall shadows. Let's see.
Bounce off the projections.
Let's see. We started, we were about here. Got it to here. Like it's definitely a little brighter. It's kind of brightening up my main a little bit more than I'd have liked, but
if I can move this way, move this over, you'll get more out of it.
It's fine. Let's kind of do something like that. I'll play with it in the dynamic range a little bit. Okay, so I think like this is a really nice starting point for fundamentally the 3-light setup, right? If I wanted to make that a little bigger, spread a little more, could use a like a 30 degree, 20, 30 degree grid. I could also take the reflector off. I think this is fine. I think this works. And so now that I have something like this, I'm actually going to turn my main light down a hair. Now that I have something like this, I can move. It's actually pretty forgiving. So I don't want to be afraid of shadows. So I'll move around. He can move around. And sometimes you'll get these less traditional lighting patterns that I think lend themselves to a more interesting image. And so I'd want to like work with him to try to find different expressions and kind of different micro pose of the face, and then always be quick, because sometimes it's the in-between shot that is the interesting thing. And then just kind of don't be afraid to, you know, get up in there, right? And you'll get some really cool, nice stuff like this. That's great. Yeah, I'll look off right here. And just at me. And so I kind of I bounce around, right? And lift that head up. Yeah, that's good. Lift that up a little bit. Good. Open the mouth just a little bit for me. Good. Good. And kind of like try that. There's, you know, the sniff the knuckles thing. Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. And then bring it down a little lower off the face. Good. And look up this way for me. Good. And a little more serious. Oh, missed the focus. There we go. Cool. And so you can kind of see like I'm bouncing around, right? Give him a second to come in. Cool, right? Just out of curiosity, let's see what this spread works. Man, this is a little bit. Where'd you get this from? I know, I can say.
I bought it off of Joe McNally, so odds are it's been through a war.
Also, when it gets hot.
Yeah. They get ovalized, and then the round doesn't fit in the oval, and then this happens. So it survived me and Joe. Okay.
I'm going to turn it down a little bit because this does tend to kill a little bit of light. Let's just see if I want this to be a little bigger, what that's going to look like.
So question in the chat, is the camera set to monochrome or is capture one?
I have capture doing the desaturation. So it was just spilling a little bit and getting a little on his face. So you can kind of see it lift up a little bit there, spilling, hence the grid, but that looks a little better there. Cool. Great. And there's your negative space. Cool. And so there's a lot of play you can have with this. It's incredibly flexible going left or right with kind of whatever you're after. But I think like there's some really, really cool, interesting, like this is what I mean when I say that it's close. It's almost like uncomfortably close, but I'm into it. I think it's very, very cool. And like you get this kind of stuff, which is really fun. Just good personality character portraits. And it feels like you're kind of almost, he's telling a story. You're in the middle of a conversation. And you're just kind of right there. That's kind of what I like about it. It feels like a visual conversation. Questions? How are we doing?
All right. You guys all right? No one's got a question.
No one's got questions?
He's this amazing. All right, pop quiz. No, I was kidding.
No? All right. You can also do a lot here, like with color. So I think this really works nicely in black and white. But for those of you that are kind of curious about it, you can definitely do something color-wise in here that totally works too. So cool. Yeah, cool. Cool. Okay. All right. So sometimes I want to make life intentionally more challenging. And this is where I start to introduce.
Someone's asking.
Oh, great, I love it.
Why are desaturating? Is it see the balance of light and shadow better? Like, why do you go black and white?
I mean, it's two reasons. Yeah, I think it's easier to see tonality better in black and white, but I know that there's always the argument about color in black and white, and I know that color oftentimes gets pointed to be antiquated or out of date, and color feels more modern. I understand that. But I think getting into the does this image work better in black and white's the wrong approach. If I'm shooting black and white, it's usually with intention. If I'm shooting color, it's with intention. There should be a reason for each choice. And so here, when it's black and white, you notice that I change the power of the background exposure because the exposure was different when it went into black and white. And so I'm thinking about tone and contrast more when it's a black and white image. It's all about deliberate choices. And when I first started getting into photography, the first images that I ever fell in love with were black and white images. And so they've always really resonated more with me than color. I think sometimes people use black and white as a crutch, but I think it can be really, really beautiful when it's done correctly. I compare it to like cooking or music. It's, there's something to be said for a really elaborate, complicated, unusual dish where you're doing all kinds of new and creative, complicated things. There's also something to be said for roasting a chicken really well. It's easy to cook chicken. It's hard to do it really well. Or it's using color when it's done well is like an orchestra. But I also really love the pianist sitting alone by themselves. Sometimes that has more of an emotional resonance to me. And so I think it's not about one being current or antiquated. I think it's really more about intent and feeling and what you want to achieve with the images. And so the black and white isn't so much a technical thing as it is like a stripping down all of the extra stuff and just kind of getting to the core of what you're going after. And I kind of like the romanticism that black and white affords the image a little bit.
Lou in the chat's asking, how about using a reflector to add light on the left?
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of my choice for adding the fill light into the room. You definitely could do that. If you favor a more well-lit image, by all means. I also sometimes really loves me a deep, dark shadow. And so, if that's what you're into, go for it.
And then someone else is asking, what is your go-to method for avoiding unwanted shadows in a compact setup?
Shadows in what way? Like on a background?
You're asking me like it's my question. I don't know.
So a lot of times it's position of light to the camera or quality of light. So a hard shadow is going to create more of a shadow. A hard light's going to create more of a shadow. Or if you're really close to the subject and you see it. Sorry. If you're really close to your subject is close to the background, sometimes that will cast a shadow. So you can kind of see that I've got a little bit of an angle on it. That can help kind of create more distance between the two to kind of hide that shadow, or how you frame it or angle yourself. All of those things kind of can help you shoot around it. Yes?
I noticed you only metered once.
Yep.
Or, like, how important really is it to really nail down like learning the meter, or
Sure.
just feel it as you go?
Sure. So he said that he knows I only metered once. How important is it to use a meter? So I am a big fan of learning with the meter. I will be totally honest. A lot of times I don't use a meter. Sometimes I do. Depends on what I need it for. So if I need to create something quickly and it's really about speed, I walk in with a meter and I go, this is what I'm going to do. Boom, 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 boom. And I can actually set the whole thing up without taking a picture. Other times, I kind of want to go in and paint it a little bit. I'm like, a little light here, a little light here, a little light here, a little light here, right? And I'm doing it a little more by feel. If you are trying to repeat and you're trying to learn, I think understanding the meter and understanding measurements of light is really, really helpful. Because you're like, all right, I'm watching somebody bake a cake. And if you watch a video of somebody baking a cake and they never tell you, you're like, okay, there's flour and sugar, and so, but they never tell you how much, it's hard for you to duplicate it, right? The meter is what helps you measure it. It helps you know how much, which is why I said in the beginning, I go, okay, it started with a 4, but I'm going to intentionally bump it up half of a stop, full stop, right? And you learn those tricks. But it's hard to learn that by eye. It's helpful if you learn it with a measurement. Second time I use it is if I have to duplicate something. So sometimes I'm doing a pre-light day and I have to go in and I set the whole thing up. And then I have to measure it, break it all down, and then set it up the next day. Helps me measure the light, right? Or if I'm doing an advertisement where I'm shooting 2 different people and they have to be comped together, but it's got to look like the same light, even though it's in 2 different spaces on 2 different days. I got to measure it, right? Otherwise, you can never repeat the exact same setup. So if you've got something that you use on a regular basis, or you want to repeat something, meter is indispensable, right? But what is at the core of whenever I'm moving lights around is measurement of light. Because once you use a meter a lot, once you get really comfortable with exposure, you go, okay, I know what a stop's going to look like. I know what 2 stops going to look like. I know what half stop's going to look like. When I'm changing my light, I'm changing it with those things in my head. But it's only because you kind of learn how measurements of light look visually. And that's just the more you do it, the easier it becomes. So do you need it at the digital age? No. Does it make it easier in some capacity for certain things? Absolutely. Is it necessary in certain types of work? Absolutely. I also think it's really good in learning. But, you know, everybody's, like when I first started, I'm like flipping lights on, I'm turning it up and down. And then when I got a meter, I got better at it. So, you know, that's always the trade-off. But I'm a fan. Cool. Yes.
Light setup, would you consider it more a masculine light, or do you shoot a woman the same way?
I've used it for both. It depends on the person. So he said, is it a masculine setup? Would you use it for men and women? I use it for both all the time. It's more about how I want to portray the person than anything else. If I want to create a really glowy, flattering light, then I'm going to have a much brighter fill light, right? If I want more texture to the face, I might show more shadow. I think some people get too obsessed with the idea of needing to not show age or wrinkles. And I don't feel that way. I love texture on the face. I love the character. I love the story, the history. I love all of those things. I don't think it's necessarily something to be afraid of. One of my favorite quotes, it was an Henri Cartier-Bresson quote, and he said, he goes, I think at some age you get the face you deserve. I always like that idea. You get the face you deserve. I think that's a great quote. But I also like that's the person, you know? And so it's not really about it being masculine or feminine. It's more about how you choose to show the subject, flattering or not, or, you know, light and bright or not. It totally depends on what you're after.
I completely agree with you. Texture and loving it.
Yeah.
But the person, a lot of times, the older woman that you're taking a picture of.
So that's a different question. So that gets to intent. So he had said that sometimes certain people want to look more even. They want Photoshop, right? So it comes to the why you're making the portrait. Are you pleasing yourself? Are you pleasing the sitter? Or are you pleasing someone else? If you are pleasing the sitter because they hired you, I'd do whatever you want me to do. You want more light? Sure. Fine. But it's all about intent. Still, it's like, how do you want to show them? Who's the boss? Sometimes you're not the boss. You know? This is what it is, you know? Yeah, provide a service, exactly. So if that's what they want, I give you what you want. It's fine. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna show you one other cool thing. So every once in a while, I want to make a more complicated light. Can I get another battery for this? This is, oh, never mind, it's working. It was showing 0 and then it turned back on. Okay. So back in the day, and I mean like long time ago, when they were using continuous lights a lot more than strobes, there were a great number of types of continuous lights, and you'll still see some of these pop up in film and TV every once in a while. The Mole Richardsons have a pretty wide range of different types of stuff. I love shooting with those, the Fresnels and all those sorts of things. They had this one light that was really unique. It was called a scoop. It kind of looked like this a little bit, but it was a bit deeper, kind of more of like a telezoom reflector, if you're ever familiar with those. And it had a very smooth interior, and it was pretty big. And the light inside of it was a long tube. It's important because of how it filled the dish. It filled the dish, which was silver, in a way that was just this really, it was a hard light, but it was smooth and polished. It was just this really beautifully unique quality of light. And I always loved that quality of light. You'd see it in a lot of, you know, if you go back and look at Karsh's work and Penn to a degree, you'd see the use of these lights. And so they're very hot to be in front of. They're big, they're unwieldy. And so I was looking for a way that I could find a similar look to it with strobes. And so I basically figured out a couple of different solutions. I would start with a Magnum light, which is just this, just a big reflector. This is a white dish, so it's going to soften it up a little bit. And what I would do is I would put like a beauty dish sock over the end just to alleviate the harshness a little bit. Still hard, still a relatively small light source, but just a little bit softer. The white helps to alleviate that a little bit. And if I stagger something like this with a larger light source, I can kind of get some of the characteristics of each. The benefit of the grid, just like there, is it's going to give me a little bit more of a concentrated beam. So yeah. Yeah, there's a black grid and a white grid. My understanding of the two, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the white grid is going to slightly soften the quality of light a little bit. Is that kind of its intention a little?
The white grid softens is the edge of the light.
Yeah.
So it's not creating such a definition. So it's got a certain subtle
Softer
bleed.
gradation of hard
Right.
fall off. Yeah. Yeah. And so it just gives you a little bit more of a directionality on this. I'll kind of show you. Let me flip off the modeling light here, what it's doing. Can you flip the overheads off for just a second? Is that okay? Just so we can see it. Sure. Okay. So I'll show you just the dish. Okay, right? It's, if you can kind of see by the edge, it's hard, but it's not super crisp. There's just a little softness to it, which is nice, which I like. But if I throw this on it, because you can see that it's across the whole background. This creates a much tighter beam of light, right? So you get what is effectively a hard-ish quality, right? The size of it makes it a little softer, and the grid restricts it back down. So it's like you're making it big to make it a little smaller in spread, right? So it's an interesting, like, kind of mix of characteristics. Now, by default, if I were to just use this alone, let's actually test my exposure here. It's fine. Let's just see. So it's giving me 5, 6, 8. So I'm going to turn it down a stop and an 8. Okay. And so this is it by, let me turn the other ones off so you can kind of see what it's doing by itself. I'll turn everything else off. That's where the light's going. It's a tiny bit. Okay? Now what's cool about this is you can kind of see there's a little bit of specularity to it. I'm going to turn it up just a hair. Maybe like, I don't know, a third or a fourth stop of light, just a tiny bit. I'm just putting a tiny little pocket of light on the face. Okay? I could actually do something really cool with this. I could throw the background light on. I could put a little bit more fill into it. I could actually turn this into something kind of interesting and cool if I wanted to. And I really don't hate the quality of light on him. I think it's pretty nice. Okay? But watch what happens when I turn everything back on. You're going to notice a couple of different things. So I had this exposed at about 4.5 on an f4 exposure. I think I had this at about a 5.6, so about a stop overexposed. And so when you add something that's already exposed, you're actually going to get an even more overexposed. So overall, it's a little bright. So to get some of that, because they're kind of, this is washing out that hardness specularity that I had. So I don't actually want to keep this as my main light. Instead, I'm actually going to turn it down, maybe about a stop or so, to offset the difference. Because I want this to show up a little bit more, and I want this to show up a little bit less. I'll bring it down even more, I think. Say another half a stop. And so the more I turn this up and the more I turn this down, you're going to kind of mix and match some of these characteristics, which I think is pretty cool. I'll turn this back one more time. Cool. I'm just going to turn it a little more to the side. Just give it a little more drama. And so I'm kind of mixing and matching these little things.
I'm sorry, I keep looking at your work. Like resetting.
Turn it down just a little bit more. I'm just kind of finessing and balancing it a little bit. The more I turn my main soft light down, the harder the characteristics are going to be. And you can kind of see the lights shifted a little bit more to the front from where we started, which was kind of more to the right side, right? Something kind of there, versus this is putting it a little more to the front. You can kind of see that this is the more powerful light, right? Cool. It's pretty close, which makes it a little softer, but you're still going to get kind of that punchy specularity that I think is pretty cool. So I'm going to bring it around a little bit just so I can put a little more sparkle in the eyes. And then we'll let that be kind of the shift to the side. And this is how I start to create kind of that more complex lighting, which I think looks really pretty. Cool, cool, cool. I'm going to bring that down a little bit. Nice. Yeah. So you're getting that little sparkle kind of in the eyes right there. Like that. And let's just see, just out of curiosity, if we turn off the main light, what's that doing? What's that look like? Yeah, see that's without, and that's with. Kind of see that little layering that it's bringing in? Just a little. Turn it up just a hair. That way. Just turn it up a little bit. And I'm now going to shoot it a little more to the side. Cool. I'm going to flip that modeling light on so I can see it a little more. Cool, great. You don't happen to have a flag, do you? I don't know, I just want to put a little shadow on the side. Or cinefoil. Can I put cinefoil? Great. I'm gonna.
I don't know how big this is.
That's great. That's fine. So that's perfect. So at the moment, looks great. So this is really nice. I upped the power just a little bit on that main, but that's great. Put the eyes right where they were. Perfect. Yeah, no, that was good. Very pensive. I'm going to put a little shadow on the face from that main light. Sorry, the harder light. It's going to give me a little bit of that shadow. Cool. Just cast a little bit of a shadow. And then let's make that go a little brighter. What's that?
Just check out of the way.
Ah, that's fine. Just casting a little bit of an intentional shadow. Cool. That's great right there.
That's cool.
And then drop that hand for me. Nice. Yeah.
Someone in the chat is asking, would you get a similar effect if you remove the baffle of diffusion from the softbox? So I'm guessing they're saying
No, it's different. The Magnum's going to be a little punchier, which is still kind of my preference. But that's nice right there. It's hardish. It's a fun quality of light. A little bit, just with your eyes. There you go, right there. But it is a little different than just your eyes that make good. Cool. And then if I come this way, go here. Cool. Yeah, I think we got some really, really beautiful stuff. I think this all looks really nice. And kind of once you have it, it really just boils down to kind of how you want to play. And that's it, you know. I'm going to move this a little closer to the background. And I'll just sit there and I'll kind of tweak some things and move them around and, you know, see what works. That's good right there. Perfect. And then just your eyes at me. Great. Cool. Super cool. Cool. Yeah, that's kind of it. Yeah. I know. It's professionally good looking. The thing is like with this kind of stuff, oftentimes you're given sometimes a minute or two. You come in, you knock this out, and you kind of come in with something of a safety approach, and you just kind of like having 20 minutes of this is way more than I would ever need to kind of run through this. Come in, you kind of just hang out and talk to the person, and that really becomes a big part of it. Yeah, but you know, you can kind of see there's a ton of flexibility kind of within the space and adding in some shadows, taking it away. You can kind of do all kinds of cool things. How do you want to, you know, draw out personality of the sitter? And that's kind of it. Yeah. Super, super cool. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Any other last couple of questions we've got?
about a hand for Justin for just sitting there?
Oh, I broke a sweat. Oh.
He's doing the Lord's work today. Yeah. Cool.
He had to bring a shirt. I mean,
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. This,
you guys are good. No questions.
Anybody have any other questions?
All right, cool. I want to thank Chris for coming through. I want to thank Justin for sitting down. I want to thank you guys for
Good job.
showing up.
Thanks. Good sit.
If you're watching this on playback, hit like, smash, subscribe, and there's plenty of classes, including another one from this guy from a little while ago. So you can check out more Chris on this channel. Thank you guys for coming out. We appreciate you, and enjoy the rest of your day, guys. Thanks so
tuning
much.
in. Thank you.